Prince William entered the palace council room, expecting another carefully managed conversation about royal responsibilities. What he did not expect was for his mother's brother to stand up, face Queen Camilla directly, and say the words the palace had spent years trying to keep buried. By the time that meeting was over, William's calm had broken. Camilla sat frozen in front of the council, and the monarchy's most sensitive emotional wound had been exposed in front of everyone. Before we get into what this moment really means, for the royal family, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss the next update. King Charles had called the meeting at Buckingham Palace because the crown was facing an issue it could no longer delay. The Palace Council, a private circle of senior royals and trusted advisors, had gathered to settle a deeply sensitive matter. The issue was how Diana's legacy would be used in a charitable memorial connected to her eldest son. Charles sat at the head of the table, Camilla sat beside him, William sat across from them, and Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, was seated nearby. Spencer had been invited to approve family letters, childhood memories, and private reflections. His presence was supposed to bring the Spencer family and the crown together. Instead, he stood up, placed both hands on the table, and changed the entire direction of the meeting. He turned toward the Queen and accused her of allowing Diana's memory to be softened, managed, and pushed aside in order to protect her own position. He demanded that the council recognize Diana not as a closed chapter, but as the mother whose influence still lived through William and through the monarchy he would one day inherit. William tightened his grip on the table. He tried to stay composed, but his breathing shifted when his uncle said Diana's love had been treated like an inconvenience that needed careful handling. Camilla did not move. Every person in the room looked toward her. She said she had never attempted to erase Diana. Spencer replied that a person does not need to remove a name completely in order to erase a presence. Silence, controlled speeches, and institutional management could do the same thing. Then he placed a sealed folder in front of the king. Inside, he said, were letters and palace memoranda, internal records that had shaped royal decisions and allegedly showed attempts to separate William's public duty from his mother's emotional legacy. William looked at the folder. Then he looked at his father, and something inside him broke. He pushed his chair back, covered his face for a moment, and left the chamber without asking permission. Catherine stood and followed him. Charles remained staring at the unopened folder while Camilla sat under the silent judgment of the council. But William's collapse cannot be explained by one confrontation alone. Every person in that room had arrived carrying a different version of Diana, and each version threatened someone else's place inside the monarchy. On the surface, the confrontation was between Diana's brother and the woman who later became queen. But the deepest conflict belonged to William. He was not simply watching two people from his parents' past collide. He was standing between the family that raised his mother, the father who now wore the crown, and the institution that had taught him to hide grief behind duty. Every side wanted loyalty from him, but none of them fully understood what that loyalty had cost. William had lived with that split since childhood. As Diana's son, he carried memories that no ceremony could ever contain. As the future king, he had been trained to put the monarchy before his own pain. The crown, meaning the institution of royal authority and duty, moved from one sovereign to the next and demanded discipline, even when grief was still raw. William loved his mother deeply, but he also loved Charles, and every time Diana's name became a palace issue, William felt as though honoring one parent might injure the other. Charles Spencer carried a different kind of pain. Diana's brother had spent years believing he had failed to protect her while she was alive. After her death, that guilt hardened into a promise. He watched William grow into duty while swallowing emotions that should never have been treated as weakness. To Spencer, defending his sister's memory was no longer just about the past. It was about protecting her son from carrying that past alone. Charles had sensed the danger before the council began. In a private exchange outside the chamber, the King told William that the meeting required calm, not another reopening of old wounds. William looked straight at his father and replied, "The past never closed for me." The king heard the warning, but he still believed dignity and procedure could control what came next. He did not yet understand that William had reached the limit of silence. Camilla felt it too. Before entering the room, she sat alone, adjusting a bracelet again and again as she tried to steady her hand. The queen feared Spencer's anger, but she feared William's honesty even more. If William finally said out loud what he had hidden for years, Charles might be forced to choose between the woman beside him and the son in front of him. Catherine watched William reread the council papers without taking in a single word. She quietly asked whether he wanted the meeting delayed. William shook his head. He said delay would only give other people more time to decide how Diana should be remembered. Spencer approached him moments later and made one private promise. He would not attack William or the king, but he would not allow Diana to become a polished footnote. William gave no clear approval, but he also did not ask his uncle to stay silent. Because Spencer's anger had begun weeks earlier, when one palace ceremony removed Diana's name at the very last moment. That missing name became the spark. Because weeks before the council exploded, one carefully edited ceremony convinced Diana's brother that the palace was not preserving history. It was rewriting it. The road to the palace council confrontation began with an event that was supposed to honor compassion. William was expected to dedicate a new royal center for vulnerable young people. The project had been partly inspired by the emotional openness Diana showed during his childhood. Her name appeared throughout the first version of the program. Then, only hours before the event, every direct mention of her disappeared. One instruction had changed the entire ceremony, and Charles Spencer never forgot who had approved it. William had supported the Diana Center for Young Families because it connected his mother's natural compassion with the work he wanted to carry forward. The center was designed to support parents and children facing trauma, isolation, instability, and hardship. The early program described Diana as the emotional inspiration behind the project. Spencer had been invited to give a family reflection about the values she had passed on to her sons. The program, meaning the official printed wording and order for the royal event, was supposed to make that connection clear. But as the ceremony approached, senior advisors became uneasy. They worried that linking Diana too strongly to William would once again invite public comparisons between the late princess and Camilla. Instead of allowing the event to honor a mother's influence, advisors warned that it might become another public judgment on the queen. Their solution was simple and dangerous. Reduce the personal language and present the center as a broader royal initiative. William discovered the change during a rehearsal at Kensington Palace. An aide handed him a revised program that had been sent from Camilla's office. The phrase, "inspired by Diana, Princess of Wales," had been replaced with an initiative of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Spencer's tribute had vanished completely. William stared at the page and asked who had approved the change. When he was told the Queen's household had requested more institutional balance, he folded the paper once and set it down. Catherine watched him continue the rehearsal as if nothing had happened. He answered questions. He confirmed timings. He moved through every duty expected of him, but she could see the distance settle over him. William spoke less. He avoided looking at the original program, and he refused to discuss the change until they were alone. Spencer learned the truth after arriving for the ceremony. He stopped the event secretary near a closed corridor door and demanded to know why his sister's name had disappeared from a project shaped by her example. The official gave procedural explanations about balance, unity, and palace approval. None of those answers addressed the real question. Later, Spencer received a copied revision sheet through a documented exchange with a member of the planning team. Next to the disputed wording were Camilla's handwritten words. Avoid excessive personal attribution. Whether she meant caution or control no longer mattered to him. He folded the page into his jacket and requested a private audience with Charles. When the king refused, Diana's brother demanded a seat before the palace council with William present. Spencer had stayed silent while the cameras watched, but inside the council chamber, there would be no edited program, no rehearsed smiles, and no corridor through which Camilla could quietly escape. When Charles Spencer rose from his chair, no one interrupted him. The room understood that protocol had already failed. He placed the altered ceremony program beside Camilla's papers, pointed to the missing tribute, and asked whether Diana's name had become so dangerous that even her own son needed to be protected from it. Camilla looked toward Charles. The king did not speak. Then Spencer delivered the accusation that destroyed William's control. Charles ordered every word spoken in that chamber to remain confidential. The Palace Council, a private meeting for sensitive royal matters, had no cameras, no recording devices, and no public audience beyond those sitting at the long table. But the king's authority weakened the moment Spencer pushed the revised program into the center of the table. That single page carried more force than any official statement because it showed exactly where Diana's name had been removed. Spencer did not begin by shouting. He acknowledged that Camilla had endured years of public judgment and had worked hard to establish her place beside the king. But acceptance, he said, did not give her permission to reduce Diana's role in William's life. The future king was not only carrying a royal title, he was carrying the memory of a mother whose influence had shaped the very compassion the monarchy was now celebrating. Camilla stood. She told Diana's brother that he was accusing her of cruelty without understanding the pressure of protecting the crown. The queen argued that every reference to the past could reopen old wounds and turn a charitable ceremony into another public trial. Spencer stepped closer to the table and replied that Diana had heard that same defense whenever her feelings became inconvenient. Protection, he said, had too often meant silence. William stayed still until his uncle turned toward him. Spencer apologized for forcing him to hear the confrontation. Then he said Diana would have been heartbroken to see her son needing permission to honor her. William lowered his head. He pressed both hands against his eyes. But the grief broke through. In front of the council, in front of his father, and in front of the woman at the center of the dispute, he began to cry. Camilla finally admitted that she had approved the revised program. She explained that her intention had been to prevent the ceremony from becoming another comparison between herself and the late princess. Charles looked at her in disbelief. The king had believed communications officials had made the change. Now, he understood that the instruction had come directly from her office. William raised his head and spoke through the emotion. Avoiding comparison, he told Camilla, was not the same as creating peace. Every attempt to make Diana smaller forced him to relive the feeling that his mother had become a problem the family wanted to manage. Charles struck the table once and suspended the meeting. But before leaving, William told his father the matter could not be buried again. He demanded a formal decision over who had authority over Diana's legacy inside the royal household. William's tears had changed the balance of power in the room. But emotion alone could not decide the outcome. The next battle would be fought through authority, inheritance, and the king's power to decide whose memory the crown was willing to protect. After the chamber emptied, Charles remained alone with the altered program, Spencer's sealed folder, and the echo of his son's chair scraping against the floor. For decades, Charles had survived by separating private emotion from royal responsibility. Now that separation had collapsed, defending Camilla risked breaking William. Supporting William risked exposing his wife, and refusing to choose would prove that the king no longer controlled the family gathered beneath his crown. Charles still held the official power. As sovereign, he controlled council procedure, senior household appointments, commemorative policy, and the official language attached to royal projects. A sovereign is the reigning monarch with final authority over the crown's internal decisions. That meant no lasting settlement over Diana's legacy could exist without his approval, but the power around him had already split. Camilla's household influenced ceremonial language. William's office controlled his charitable work, and Spencer held something no royal title could grant: the moral authority of Diana's family and the freedom to challenge the palace publicly. Charles opened the sealed folder after the final aide left the room. Inside were edited speeches, delayed approvals, shortened tributes, and internal notes, reducing Diana's presence in events connected to her sons. He read one document, then another. The king removed his glasses, placed them beside the papers, and sat still when he realized the pattern went far beyond one ceremony. This was not one isolated mistake. It was a system of caution that had slowly turned into control. Camilla returned before he could close the file. She told her husband she had acted to prevent endless comparisons, another wave of headlines, and another public judgment of their marriage. Charles replied that she had not protected him by making decisions behind his back. The Queen's composure began to crack. She asked whether decades of loyalty meant nothing now that William had cried in front of witnesses. The king did not answer immediately, and that silence frightened her more than anger would have. Catherine entered later without William. She told Charles that Spencer's words had not caused William's collapse. They had released years of pain that had already been buried inside him. The princess explained that William had long believed defending Diana would look like disloyalty to his father. Charles finally understood the truth. His son's silence had never meant healing. It had meant restraint. Charles drafted a formal resolution giving William authority over Diana-related charitable commemorations, with the Spencer family consulted on private material. A resolution is an official written decision that defines what the royal household must follow. The measure would prevent Camilla's office from altering future tributes and reduce her influence over the monarchy's most painful memory. An aide delivered the draft to Camilla's private sitting room. She read the final clause twice, removed her royal brooch, and ordered the door closed. The resolution had not yet been signed, but Camilla understood what it meant immediately. The confrontation was no longer about one deleted name. It had begun to redraw the boundaries of her power. By nightfall, the council chamber was empty, but the palace had separated into invisible camps. William withdrew with Catherine. Camilla canceled her evening engagement. Charles ordered every document connected to Diana's commemorations to be reviewed. Aides who had spent years avoiding the subject suddenly began searching old files for their own signatures. No public announcement had been made, but inside the royal household, everyone understood that the Queen's authority had been challenged, and the Prince of Wales had stopped pretending he was unaffected. Charles acted quickly because delay now carried its own danger. He ordered the communications offices of the King, the Queen, and the Prince of Wales to surrender every email, draft, speech, memorial plan, and charitable note connected to Diana. The communications offices were the palace teams responsible for shaping official language and public messaging. Their records could reveal who had changed what. Staff were warned not to destroy documents, speak to journalists, or alter earlier files. The king wanted the full truth before the story escaped the palace. Charles also postponed the final council decision until the next morning. Until then, Camilla's office was temporarily blocked from changing any language connected to William's tributes. That restriction gave the future king practical control before the resolution was even signed. It also sent a brutal message. The king no longer trusted his wife's household to act without supervision. Camilla dismissed her dresser and sat alone beside the unsigned document. She pushed the altered ceremony program into a drawer, closed it, then pulled it out again moments later. Anger came first, then fear followed. The Queen could defend a cautious decision, but she could not easily defend acting without Charles's knowledge. For the first time, she understood that he might not see her choice as protection. He might see it as betrayal. William sat with Catherine at Kensington Palace, still holding the council papers. He told her he felt ashamed for losing control in front of everyone. She took the pages from his hands and told him the shame belonged to those who had made grief feel unacceptable. William admitted that defeating Camilla had never been what he wanted. What frightened him more was that speaking honestly might cost him his father. Charles then received a private call from a senior courtier. In that documented conversation, the official confirmed that Camilla's office had repeatedly requested softer language around Diana. Staff had followed those requests because they believed the wishes reflected the king's private instructions. That revelation made the pattern impossible to dismiss. Meanwhile, Spencer packed his papers at a London residence, convinced he had hurt William while trying to defend him. Then a handwritten note arrived. It contained one sentence. "You said what I could not." Diana's brother unpacked the folder and decided to stay. Shortly before midnight, Charles sent an equerry, an official royal aide who delivers personal instructions, to summon William alone. No advisors, no Camilla, no Catherine, no record. For the first time since the confrontation, father and son would meet without a council table between them, and what William said in that room would decide whether the monarchy fractured further or finally faced its grief. Charles met William before sunrise in a private room overlooking the palace gardens. There were no red boxes, no equerries, and no prepared statements. The king had removed his jacket. William carried nothing. For several moments, neither man spoke. Then Charles asked the question he had avoided for years.